Henry Ford had once been voted the greatest man in history, after Napoleon Bonaparte and Jesus Christ. Perhaps Americans saw in him what they liked best in themselves in 1927. A millionaire Huck Finn, a shy, awkward farm boy turned automaker, who hated laziness and disorder, labor unions, and Wall Street bankers. A prankster. He was the living symbol of power, prosperity, and America's faith in every man for himself, in that time before the Great Depression, when captains of industry mattered more than presidents. Back in 1914, Ford had revolutionized assembly line production, and to keep his workers from quitting, he announced he would raise their pay to a generous $5 a day, twice what they earned before, and twice what they could earn at any other auto company. It was a simple American bargain: security and high wages in exchange for hard work.
The legend of Henry Ford, of course, was greatly embellished by his offer of $5 a day, and the word of that penetrated the most remote mountain village in West Virginia and Kentucky and Tennessee, and the Ruther brothers heard about the $5 a day in Wheeling too, and I can tell you it looked mighty good.
They came to Detroit in hopes of a life they could find nowhere else. Ford workers enjoyed company picnics, could live in company housing, and even buy the Ford cars they produced. High wages paid off in high production and high profits for the company.
My family moved to Detroit in 1927 from Columbus, Ohio. I didn't like Detroit when I first moved. In fact, I ran away 3 times, went back to Columbus, Ohio. But my daddy finally convinced me the 3rd time that I had to stay. And Detroit at that time was a booming town. Businesses were booming, cars were being bought, and you had the big bands, you had the dance halls. Everything was going great.
My father and uncle arrived in Detroit in 1926 from Mexico via Kansas City in a Model T. People came from Guanajuato, San Luis Potosí, of course, Mexico City.
And in our neighborhood, I know of no kid that I associated with where their parents were born in America. Nobody.
We had the Poles, we had the Lithuanians, we had Finnish, we had Scotch, we had Italian.
In great waves of migration from Europe and the American South, the hopeful had found their way to Detroit's thriving ethnic neighborhoods. They had been Ukrainian peasants and Alabama sharecroppers. Now they were auto workers, 50,000 strong at Ford's River Rouge factory, the largest industrial complex in history. Here was a strange new world. Thundering forges, the huge foundry and powerhouse, the endless miles of assembly line. They called it the Cathedral of Industry, and here, like clockwork, they made 4 cars every minute, 240 an hour, 6,000 Fords a day. The heart of American industry was Detroit, and the heart of Detroit was Henry Ford's Rouge.
My father really cherished his job at Ford's. He was one of few, clearly, blacks in Detroit who had a supervisory job in plants, and Ford's was a kind of premier plant as far as blacks were concerned.
At Ford, I don't know if anyone has told you, you had a little sort of brass badge about this big and this wide, and he used to wear it on their blue serge suits on Sunday, their lapel. And they were proud of the fact that they worked for Ford.
This badge was a badge of distinction. It might even get you a deaconship in a church. It might even get you a beautiful lady. It was a kind of pass key to, the good things in life and the community. I mean, you were invited to this and that. You were almost kind of a celebrity sense.
My mother did day work. She'd go like to your house today and his house tomorrow and his house the next day. And she did day work, washing and ironing. And then I got this job at Ford's. And I had never seen quite so much money. I thought I was wealthy. Bought myself a car. If you're going to work for Ford, I thought you ought to have.
Cost less than a team of horses.
The idea that a farmer would ever own an automobile was beyond conception. Automobiles were for rich people.
I drove a car when I was 11 years old. My nephew drove a car when he was 8 years old. Prior to the automobile, there were people that lived their whole life that never traveled over 50 miles from home. Women particularly were isolated in farm homes.
It really changed their lifestyle. The girls learned to drive as well as but of course, on a Sunday or a big outing, the man took the wheel.
In the booming 1920s, the mass production and mass marketing of automobiles changed America forever. Thousands of new bridges and paved highways for tourists, for truckers, and for the real estate boom in faraway Florida. With easy credit, Americans became a nation of gadget-hungry consumers, especially consumers of automobiles. More cars meant more steel mills, oil refineries, rubber and glass plants. Thousands of new jobs in Toledo, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles, and Detroit. But the prosperity was not all it seemed. The legend of Henry Ford now drew far more workers than the Rouge could employ. Job seekers crowded the company parking lot on Miller Road.
My father, my uncle, and myself went to the area where people were congregating. You felt that you were like a part of humanity on the move. So for 5 months, day and night, we waited for that employment office to open. I eventually did get a job. I wound up working in the foundry machine shop on the midnight shift. The long conversations that had taken place in that parking lot as you waited, night after night, day after day, all of a sudden came to a standstill. No talk, no walk, don't leave your job without permission, not even for a drink of water, not even to go to the toilet, not one step away from your operation.
At first, I worked in a glass plant. I made windshields. And windshields ain't funny to lift, you know. And sometimes we would make $500 and $600 a day.
And the difficulty with an assembly line job is that the job controls you rather than you controlling the job. In other jobs, You can sort of set your own pace. You work fast for a little while and then work moderately. Assembly line is one pace. There's not a thing you could do about it.
They would set the production, and you had to get it or you just didn't work.
When I was a little girl in grade school, when I was in second or third or fourth grade in grade school in Detroit, one of the trips that we always took was to the Rouge plant, to the assembly line in the Rouge plant. And we would walk on a catwalk, some kind of a catwalk, over the assembly line so that we looked down on the workers that were working, and they did the same thing over and over and over again. And to see it from on top, looking down, was a sort of a strange feeling, because in a way they looked more like automatons or marionettes than real people, and yet we knew they were people, but even their arm motions would be exactly the same over and over. It was like, it really was like a human machine, I think. That's what it seemed like to us.
All you heard was your own heart beating. You'd ask yourself, I waited 5 months on that goddamn parking lot across the street to wind up with this?
Henry Ford's bargain with his workers was beginning to unravel. To cut costs, Ford now paid his workers less than Chrysler or GM and began to speed up his assembly line. Production was so profitable that Henry Ford had given his son Edsel $1 million in gold as a present on his 21st birthday, about what one man could make working at $5 a day for 700 years. By 1927, Henry Ford controlled the most important company in the most important industry in the booming American economy. He was determined to let no one interfere.
There'd be a coal strike, and they wouldn't have their power for a while. Then there'd be a railroad strike. And so he felt that he had to have control of those facilities in order to make sure that he can continue producing cars at the rate he wanted to produce them.
Deep in the Brazilian rainforest, he carved out Fordlandia, a rubber plantation the size of Connecticut. Ford coal mines in Kentucky, iron mines in Michigan, Ford factories in Yokohama and Moscow, the Ford Movie Company and Trade School, the dancing school, and 500,000 employees around the world.
He wanted to run their whole personal lives, see them go to church, entertain themselves at square dances, and then it was going to be a wonderful world, and that's what Henry wanted.
Forward again and turn the opposite.
No liquor, no jazz, no Hollywood movies. Ford distrusted the urban industrial America he himself had helped create. He prescribed old-fashioned dancing as one cure for society's ills.
And turn partners.
He thought everybody should learn to dance. And so they had dancing class. I think it was once a week. I'm not positive of that. Over at this same engineering building for the school children. We used to take our little dress shoes in a bag of some sort to school with us. And everybody, girls and boys, went to dancing class. He loved it. Maybe he thought everybody should love it. I think perhaps he did think that way quite a bit. The things he liked were good for everybody.
Ford promoted his ideas in the Dearborn Independent, a newspaper published in the Rouge Engineering Building. Every Ford dealer from Maine to Oregon was required to sell subscriptions. During the 20s, the Dearborn Independent launched a startling series of anti-Semitic articles. The paper attacked Jews for plotting to destroy Christian culture, for short skirts, high rents, and the collapse of farm prices.
The rural people had their own biases and prejudices because they lived in isolation. And Henry Ford's comment in the Dearborn Independent about a Jewish conspiracy was not surprising to them because they were quite anti-Semitic themselves. It was common expression to say, I went to town and bought something and I Jewed the storekeeper down on price.
The popular Mr. Ford spoke for many of his fellow Americans. And in faraway Munich, a New York Times reporter found a picture of Henry Ford on the wall of young Adolf Hitler's office and reprints of the Dearborn Independent on the Nazi leader's coffee table. Ford refused to abandon the campaign despite pleas from Warren Harding, Woodrow Wilson, and his own son, Edsel. As his empire grew, so did Ford's fear that he could not control his own employees. He became isolated, hired armed chauffeurs and security men from Detroit's underworld, and trusted more to his loyal first lieutenant, Harry Bennett.
Harry Bennett. We all heard of him. Not many of us really had any close contact with him, and we were mighty glad of it.
Well, he was a bastard. He thought he owned the company. He would throw his weight around all the time. And no, I don't think anybody liked Harry Bennett.
Well, of course, I liked him. Probably the only person in the whole world who did. People were afraid of him. I'm sure he had tremendous power. I think that's what they were afraid of. I mean, I think he probably had the power to hire or fire anybody.
Inside the Rouge, Bennett ran Henry Ford's new private police force. They planted microphones, patrolled the restrooms, had 9,000 informers among the employees, and enforced a ban on talking, whistling, and union organizing. One of Bennett's jobs was to help eliminate men who could not keep up with the assembly line's ever-increasing speed.
When you ask him how do he have the power, well, the power was bestowed to him by Henry Ford himself. You had to give up your manhood, you had to give up your dignity, and you had to give up your pride.
You couldn't question, you couldn't dissent, you couldn't grieve.
There wasn't any such thing as democratic industrialism, industrial democracy. No. You, if you griped about anything, you were on the streets.
By speeding up the line at the Rouge, Ford could make more cars a day without hiring more workers.
If you had, say, a row of 10 punch presses or 10 drill presses, they would always put one of their favorite boys, the Italians, we call them galoppini, that run, to turn out pieces fast. And then they pile them up on the next guy and the next guy. So by the simple process of having a fast operator, a speed king, at the beginning of the line, they speeded up all 10 machines, you see.
By the late 20s, Chrysler, GM, and Ford produced cars better than they produced jobs. Routine seasonal layoffs left most workers unemployed several months each year. Ford often let men in their 40s go in favor of younger, faster workers. When rehire time came, sales of black hair dye skyrocketed in Detroit.
Yeah, I heard my father talk about Ford. He used to come home, and I can recall it so vividly because he's a proud man. And come from a tradition in Scotland where people were used to speaking their mind and speaking up, and he always did. But he couldn't at Rouge. And it was sad.
Henry Ford had blazed a trail of breathtaking change, but no longer. Now Chevrolet caught Ford by surprise. Advertising and installment buying, even a plan to scrap old T's for new ones, were not enough. In the spring of '27, Ford shut down his assembly lines. Suddenly, Detroit found 40,000 Ford workers unemployed. Michigan's economy shuddered, and so did Wall Street. As he wrestled with retooling for a new model that summer, Henry Ford had other problems to resolve. Bowing to lawsuits and boycotts, he issued a public apology to Jews. But at home and abroad, he could not stop reprints of his anti-Semitic tracts, which in years to come would serve as the basis for speeches by Adolf Hitler. That fall in Detroit, in what would later be called the greatest industrial comeback of the 20th century, Ford introduced his Model A.
Let's spend the day in my Model A. She's running slick as a top.
Consumer confidence was so high that 500,000 people around the world made down payments without ever driving the remarkable new car or knowing its price. Huey Long ordered one, so did Mary Pickford, and the Democratic candidate for governor of New York, Franklin Roosevelt. Ford rehired thousands of men camped outside the Rouge. It seemed like the good old days.
The propaganda made us feel as though we were all members of a gigantic corporate structure was going to distribute gold to everybody, you know, the low people and the high people.
On a rainy day in October of 1929, President Herbert Hoover arrived in Dearborn to tour Ford's private outdoor museum, Greenfield Village. Greenfield was Ford's monument to the vanishing America of quiet farms and villages, the America his own spectacular achievements had helped make obsolete. Here was a world where power was measured one horse at a time, a world that ignored Ford's own thundering Rouge, making more cars with fewer workers. A dream world that ignored rising unemployment, the growing gap between rich and poor. Here, all was serene. But beyond the gates of Greenfield, Americans were living beyond their means, buying cars, radios, refrigerators, even stocks and bonds on easy credit. As Ford and Hoover toured Greenfield in the rain in October of 1929, the ticker at the stock exchange in New York was falling farther and farther behind. The president had already wired his broker to sell stock, just in case. No one knew it, but the Great Depression had already begun. 3 days later, with an anxious crowd gathering outside, the New York Stock Exchange had its worst loss ever. The stock market crash of '29 didn't cause the depression, but it did send a fearful message that the boom was suddenly turning to bust. But Henry Ford kept his workers on the job, even though demand for cars began to fall. As Americans bought fewer goods, cautious manufacturers quietly laid off employees. By the spring of 1930, the trickle of layoffs turned to a flood in towns all across America. With no federal safety nets for the unemployed, charities and local governments began to set up soup kitchens. The greatest economy in history was collapsing.
What?
When Dad couldn't find work, Mother decided that she would try baking, selling the baked goods to the neighbors. And on the days when she baked, the most wonderful aromas would spread throughout the house. Oh, it would smell so good. But we never got to eat any of the finished product. Instead, we went to the local church to stand in a bread line to bring bread home for our meals.
You'd walk down the street, you would see men standing on the corner, you would see men standing between the blocks. All of them were talking about their families.
We lived in a house in Detroit, and I must have been 6, perhaps 7 years old. And the people that came were selling shoestrings and pencils, and they always came to the front door. And other people came asking for food and came to the back door, as I remember. And I made them sandwiches, peanut butter sandwiches or whatever we had, and never was afraid of them. I don't ever remember being afraid of them. Because Mother said to me, Sally, these are people exactly like us, and only they just don't have a job like your father has at the moment.
As a show of confidence in the American system, President Hoover personally opened the 1930 baseball season. But that first year of the Depression, America alone among the Western industrial nations had no national unemployment insurance, no Social Security for the aged, and no national relief for the poor. President Hoover and Henry Ford both favored creating new jobs in private industry for the unemployed. They feared that relief money given directly to those out of work might create a permanent class of demoralized poor people. The president called for charity, confidence, and for programs to stimulate business and investment over the long term.
People, after a year, became more restless and more concerned about what the future had in store for them.
Many groups were impatient for more immediate solutions. The American Communist Party, although small in numbers, gained national attention by taking to the streets with demands for food, relief, jobs, and housing. Thousands of Americans joined party-led demonstrations across the country.
More and more people had no other recourse except to demonstrate and to go on these hunger marches against the threat of starvation. It had nothing to do with their political beliefs. It had only to do with the fact that they were starving.
Herbert Hoover was saying prosperity is just around the corner. There'll be a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. But where in the hell was that chicken? Did they ever catch him? Where was that car coming from? Who was going to buy the damn car to put it in the garage, you know?
By now, Henry Ford's Detroit had 20% unemployment, the highest of any large city in America. Soon, it would climb to 50%.
Well, all of a sudden, this thing explodes, and with hundreds of thousands of unemployed, the number of people on welfare just skyrocketed.
The city was nearly bankrupt, but Mayor Frank Murphy promised no one in Detroit would go hungry. He opened lodges for homeless men, increased the city's relief budget, and licensed 650 unemployed men as apple vendors. But despite hard times and competition from Chevrolet, Ford's assembly lines still made him a profit. His own income in 1930 would be $30 million. As winter approached, he said, "The Depression is a wholesome thing in general. It's a good thing the recovery is prolonged. Otherwise, people wouldn't profit from the illness." He went on to say, "The average working man won't do a day's work if he can get out of it."
I don't think it affected him, really. They read the papers, so I'm sure they knew what was going on. But whether they were ever affected by bread lines and that type of thing, I simply don't know. The few times I was here with the grandchildren, there were always elaborate preparations made. I remember, I don't know whether he had it made or whether he bought it, a miniature farm. And there was a thrashing machine and a tractor, and, elaborate. He thought that the boys would have a good time playing with these things.
On an April day in 1931, the 20 millionth Ford rolled off the line, and the company quickly sent it on a coast-to-coast publicity tour. With the caravan were Ford cameramen, shooting this footage for a planned advertising film. But in the small towns they toured in the summer of '31, few people were buying cars. A third of the country's Ford dealers had already gone out of business. People could hardly afford to buy parts for their old cars, let alone buy new ones.
You tried everything imaginable to get by without spending cash. Instead of ordering a box of bolts from Sears Roebuck and Company, you would go out to the old machinery in the yard, take some wrenches and hammers, take these bolts off the machinery so you could reuse them.
The Depression had silently overrun most farm towns long before. Big city papers told of food riots in the Midwest. And now, unemployment in Toledo was a staggering 80%. Mass-producing cars, or grain, or refrigerators, had become easy. But America's farmers and wage earners could no longer purchase the fruits of their labor.
You could get a slab of bacon wrapped in cellophane for 35 cents. You could get a sack of flour. Most black people made biscuits at that time. A 24-pound sack of flour for 29 cents. But where in the hell you was going to get the 29 cents from?
While living on the farm, we had absolutely no guarantees that times were going to get better. One tended to believe that this was just destiny at work, that there was nothing you could do personally to resolve the question. It was fate, just like bad weather was fate. Maybe life was better in California or in Oregon, but how are you going to get there? How can you leave friends and family and take off by yourself?
This advertising film would never be released, because by the time it was processed, Henry Ford was planning to close his factories. 7 other auto companies had already gone bankrupt in 1931. Now, even Ford was losing money and needed to retool for a new model. He quietly cut his minimum wage to $4 a day and put half his workers on short schedules rather than fire them. Caught by competition, overproduction, and the Great Depression, the Ford Motor Company, Detroit's largest employer, stopped making cars in August of 1931. Ford's great assembly lines now lay silent, watched over by Harry Bennett's guards. Now, a depression within a depression shook Detroit, as 60,000 laid-off Ford workers joined 100,000 unemployed already on the street.
The early 30s in Detroit was a time not only of terrible economic depression, but of psychological depression, of a feeling of hopelessness, of the great dream of a future for all of us in America suddenly went very dim and looked very dark. The homeless set up numerous Hoovervilles, and they would scoop out a hovel so that part of their living area was underground. They did that for warmth in the winter and piled dirt up around it and then put a sheet of corrugated tin or wood on top. And like groundhogs, they would hibernate in that during the winter.
What I find that sustained a lot of people was that people worked together in their struggle, in their common struggle to survive. Sharing living quarters, sharing resources.
Responding to complaints that immigrants were taking jobs from Americans, the city government and many businesses began firing non-citizens. Detroit's Mexican workers, most of them Mexican citizens, were especially hard hit.
These people were sometimes coerced, intimidated into returning to Mexico. And so we had what was called the repatriation.
3/4 of Detroit's Mexicans returned to their homeland.
One of the worst things about that era for me was listening to my parents' arguments. After we got in bed at night, they would begin to argue constantly about money, argue about sex. After the 8th child was born, my mother was terrified of another pregnancy, particularly after Dad was laid off. And so they would argue. And when Dad was home all day long doing nothing, he was full of energy when he went to bed at night, but Mother was exhausted from the baking and caring for her 8 children. So I would lie there quivering all over, and I'd put the pillow over my head and just pray that they would stop. I felt that we weren't going to make it. Certainly that I wasn't going to make it. I was convinced that I was going to die one night.
When that strain got so tight and was about to snap, the unemployment councils began to form. And they had them all over the city.
Detroit's 12 unemployed councils rose out of the city's ethnic neighborhoods.
I remember going to meetings with my mother, who was very active in the Ukrainian organization because she was in charge of this area. I remember my mother always saying, if we want to get anything and to be able to get some things done, that we've got to be together to do this. Otherwise, we're not going to get anything done singly.
On the street that I live, Daniel Street, is a communist hall at the very next street, and used to have a lot of activities, Hunger March to Washington, and activities like that. And a lot of those people subsequently became active in the union. I've often thought that the radical movements wouldn't have had the support that they did generate in the early 30s had there been an alternative.
The councils were not labor unions, but associations organized by the Communist Party to aid the unemployed.
We listened to speakers. We became speakers ourselves. Now we had the agitators, but who sat with us, who stood with us.
They marched to City Hall, sometimes clashed with police, and led campaigns for unemployment compensation, jobs, and an end to evictions.
People at one time were losing their homes. They used to evict them. So we used to go in there. We used to go there and fight for the people to stay in their homes.
I can recall the morning we were notified that we were going to be evicted. I was still in bed, and the first thing that attracted my attention, my mother was crying, and I started listening, and became apparent that the landlord was there and was regretting how much he had to do it, but he had to get people, he had to prospect to rent the house, and we couldn't pay the rent, and so we had to leave.
And sometime a fight would ensue, and the younger guys would get on the porch and say, no goddamn body's going to take anything out of this house, you know. And so the bailiffs would have to go back to court. Then they would send a couple of policemen out the next time to evict you. And after the bailiffs would leave, we would set the people back in.
You know, things were going so badly. There were very few victories. There were no victories, as a matter of fact. And it's a feeling of exultation that finally you've won one. The poor people of the neighborhood won one.
Still, there were 150 evictions a day. One Detroit doctor estimated that one person died from starvation every 7 hours. Detroit was paying out more in relief than any city in U.S. history.
Our country has cause for gratitude to the Almighty. We have been widely blessed with abundant harvests. We have been spared from pestilence and from calamities. Our institutions have served the people. Knowledge is multiplied and our lives are enriched with its application. Education has advanced. The health of our people has increased. We have dwelt in peace with all men. The measure of passing adversity which has come upon us should deepen the spiritual life of the people, quicken their sympathy, the spirit of self-sacrifice for others, and strengthen their courage. Many of our neighbors are in need.
It was such a feeling of helplessness. My mother felt that there must be something wrong with her personally to have this disaster visited upon us. And she also, I'm sorry to say, in a way blamed my father because she thought really if he got out there and scrounged, he could find a job. But there weren't any jobs. And I think in the long run, my father's attitude made more sense because there wasn't anything he could do about the situation. But Mother just kept thinking that if only she worked a little harder or tried a little harder, or if only she were a little bit better person, that things would work out for us.
Hoover had committed billions to restarting the economy. It had gone for loans to businesses and for state public works projects, in the hope that money at the top would stimulate jobs at the bottom. No federal money had gone directly to the unemployed. Just after New Year's Day, 1932, Detroit's Mayor Murphy went to Washington to testify that the situation in Detroit had become dangerous. Sporadic looting was reported, and the relief system had run out of money. The Ford Motor Company offered loans to some workers laid off from the Rouge, and Ford himself loaned the city government $5 million. He urged Americans to be patient, frugal, and industrious, and to plant gardens. Then he grew quiet.
He was baffled, confused, and inept in proposing solutions. He talked in simplistic terms, that if people were ambitious and get out and work, this would solve their problem. The problem was overproduction and underconsumption, not more production. Your backs were to the wall, and the pronouncement of a multimillionaire was little consolation to most people. It was irrelevant.
Desperation rose among the unemployed. In Detroit, their frustration, their anger, and their hope turned more toward Henry Ford, father of the $5 day, whose factory had now been shut for retooling for 6 months.
We've been seeing that so many people losing their homes, losing a lot of things that they have, and no job.
But they felt as though Ford had let them down. And he had.
If he couldn't sell his cars, is he going to continue to make cars and then disassemble them and assemble them and disassemble them and that sort of thing? I mean, where were the jobs going to come from?
Henry Ford couldn't end the Depression by himself. But Henry Ford was a useful symbol.
Final decision was made that we should have a march on Ford Motor Company.
On the morning of March 7th, 1932, in sub-freezing weather, 3,000 people set out for the Rouge. Communists had organized the march. Most of the marchers were laid-off auto workers, many of them first drawn to Detroit years before by the promise of Henry Ford's $5 day. When they reached Ford territory at the Dearborn City line, police ordered them to turn back.
One of the leaders of the march got up and made a statement and said, well, here we are. We've come this far. Should we turn back or should we go forward? In a big, huge cry of, let's go forward, you know.
The crowd surged up Miller Road toward the Rouge as police fired volleys of tear gas. Marchers unleashed a hail of scrap metal and frozen mud on retreating police. At Gate 3, firemen slowed the advance with freezing water. Harry Bennett himself charged out of the plant and was knocked senseless by a rock.
My memory is that people start running like crazy. And I didn't know what was happening, but I know one thing, that the tear gas, I didn't even realize they were shooting.
I saw 3 individuals fall. I saw Joe de Blasio. I saw Coleman Lenny. I saw the one, Curtis Williams, a black guy, get shot.
Police and Ford guards opened fire from inside the Rouge.
He was up on the fence, and he see me. I was on the Miller Road, and he yelled to me, Anna, Anna, they got me.
Within moments, 25 marchers and a New York Times photographer had been shot, many of them in the back. 4 men died instantly.
I came there when the air was full of tear gas, and the people were shaking the ice off of their clothes from the water hoses that the fire department had turned on them, and some people were crying. But experiences like that is it really tested people. It brought out some wonderful qualities, I think of it. Gee.
The American bargain lay shattered on Miller Road. Within days, Ford's guards stockpiled tear gas and ammunition at the Rouge and fortified Henry Ford's home with machine gun emplacements. At the funeral, the band played first the national anthem and then a communist anthem, the Internationale.
When I saw those people die on that road that day and I saw the blood flow, I was a different man. And from that day on, I've never been the same individual.
20,000 mourners joined the funeral march.
And I marched with them because I thought this was a protest that the whole country should see and feel, because we believed the nation ought to know about what took place on Miller Road and what was occurring in hundreds of cities across the length and breadth of this country during the depths of the Depression. So this was a cry for help from people, and the country should hear it.
By summer, hungry Americans would be fighting federal troops in the streets of Washington, D.C., and Franklin Roosevelt would run for president. The worst year of the Great Depression had only begun.